Jason Kensington was a man who seemed to have it all. A billionaire businessman with an impeccable reputation, his life was filled with luxurious cars, exotic vacations, and high-profile events. People admired him for his wealth and success, but they also saw him as a man of routine, someone who thrived on control and predictability. His world was made up of investments, meetings, and making calculated decisions. Everything had its place, and Jason was known for never taking risks that didn't guarantee a win. One evening, while attending a lavish party at his penthouse, Jason found himself in a playful but intense conversation with a group of friends. They were discussing the unpredictability of life, and someone made a comment about Jason's ability to control everything around him. Jason, ever confident, boasted that he could accomplish anything, even if it seemed completely out of the ordinary. His friends, amused by his self-assuredness, began to challenge him. "You could probably even marry a random woman off the street if you really wanted to. It wouldn't be hard for you to get her to say yes," one friend teased, a grin on his face. Jason laughed along, but his mind started turning. He didn't back down from challenges, no matter how bizarre they seemed. "What if I did marry a homeless woman?" Jason said, half in jest, but with a spark in his eyes. "For the fun of it." The room went silent for a moment. Jason's friends weren't sure whether he was serious or just trying to be humorous, but they quickly picked up on the idea. One of them, a bit too eager to see Jason take on a wild challenge, raised the stakes. "Okay, how about this? Marry a homeless woman, make it official with a big wedding, and we'll throw in something really special as a reward for your trouble," his friend said. "We'll give you a rare vintage car, one that's been in the family for generations." Jason leaned back in his chair, a smile slowly spreading across his face. The idea, though strange, was incredibly appealing to him. It wasn't about the car or the attention. It was about proving a point. Jason loved to win, and this felt like a challenge he could take on without breaking a sweat. After all, he was a man who could get anything he wanted, and this would be no different. With a bold shrug, Jason agreed. "It's done then," he declared. "I'll find a homeless woman, marry her, and you'll see just how easy it can be." But as Jason made that promise, something inside him stirred. He wasn't prepared for what lay ahead. The bet was simple enough, yet the complexity of what he was about to do hadn't truly hit him. He had no idea that the woman he was about to meet, the one he was willing to marry for a bet, would change the course of his life forever. Little did he know, his decision to accept the challenge would take him down a path that would lead him to discover far more than he ever anticipated. It was a reckless decision, driven by the thrill of competition. But as Jason stepped into the unknown, he couldn't help but wonder. Was he really prepared for the unexpected twist that was about to unfold in his life? Jason's plan was set in motion. He started by visiting different parts of the city, looking for someone who matched the idea he had in his mind. He wasn't sure exactly what he was searching for, but he knew it had to be someone who wouldn't question the idea of marrying him, someone who would say yes without hesitation. He thought it would be easy to find someone willing to marry him for the sake of a big wedding and the extravagant reward that followed. But as Jason walked through the city's more rundown neighborhoods, he quickly realized it wasn't going to be as simple as he imagined. The people he encountered were not the kind of individuals who would blindly agree to marry a stranger, especially not a billionaire. Many had been through difficult times and were wary of others' intentions. Jason's easy confidence started to fade as he realized that these were real lives he was dealing with, not just a game or a bet. It was on one of these streets that he first saw her. Claire was sitting on a bench, holding the hands of two small children. The twins, no more than 4 years old, were playing with a few toys beside her. The scene was heart-wrenching. Claire looked tired, but her eyes had a quiet strength that made her stand out. She wasn't begging for money or trying to draw attention to herself. Instead, she seemed lost in thought, as if she had long ago come to terms with her situation. Jason walked past her, but something made him stop. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something about the way she carried herself that felt different. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't asking for anything. Jason had met people from all walks of life, but Claire seemed untouchable in a way. He felt a strange pull, but also a sense of discomfort. He turned around and approached her, his usual confidence returning as he prepared to make his proposition. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge of curiosity. "I'm Jason Kensington. I have an offer that might interest you." Claire looked up, her expression unreadable. She didn't react the way Jason expected. Most people, especially those living in tough conditions, would jump at the opportunity to escape their circumstances. But Claire simply nodded, as if she was waiting for him to explain himself. Jason felt an odd sense of nervousness as he sat down beside her. "I want to offer you a way out of your situation," he said, trying to sound as charming as possible. "If you marry me, I'll take care of everything. You'll never have to worry about your children's future again." Claire didn't seem shocked or offended, but there was a brief silence before she spoke. "Marry you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Why would I do that?" Jason explained the bet, how it was all part of a challenge he had made with his friends, and how the stakes involved a rare vintage car. He didn't go into the details of the reward, but his intention was clear. He was offering Claire a chance at something she could never have dreamed of, a life filled with wealth, security, and luxury. To Jason's surprise, Claire didn't reject the idea outright. She didn't jump at it either. Instead, she looked at him carefully, her expression thoughtful. "And what do you expect from me?" she asked. Jason hesitated. He hadn't thought this far ahead. He had assumed Claire would be grateful for the chance, but her response made him stop and think. Claire wasn't like the people he was used to. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was assessing the situation with her own sense of dignity. After a long pause, Claire finally nodded. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll marry you, but only because it means a better future for my children." Her voice had a quiet strength, a determination that Jason hadn't expected. "But don't think this will be easy for either of us." Jason wasn't prepared for the mix of emotions he felt. He had expected her to be grateful, to see this as a way out, but instead, Claire's calm response forced him to face the gravity of his own challenge. This wasn't going to be a simple bet or a transaction. Claire was a mother, and she was looking at the long-term well-being of her family. As they made plans for the wedding, Jason realized that what he had imagined to be a fun, temporary adventure was quickly turning into something much more complicated than he could have ever predicted. He wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but he was starting to suspect that this bet was going to change his life in ways he hadn't even considered. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything about it was far grander than Claire had imagined. Jason had spared no expense, transforming a luxurious ballroom into a stunning setting that dazzled with gold accents, crystal chandeliers, and a long white carpet. Claire, standing at the entrance, could hardly believe what was unfolding before her eyes. This wasn't just a simple wedding. This was a spectacle, one that would be talked about for years to come. But despite the grandeur, she felt like a fish out of water. Claire had never imagined herself in such a place. She had never even imagined that someone like Jason Kensington, someone with more wealth than she could ever comprehend, would look at her, let alone marry her. The idea of being in the center of such attention felt overwhelming. But it wasn't just the wedding that made her feel uneasy. It was the entire situation. She had agreed to this for her children, to secure their future, but standing there, facing a room full of unfamiliar faces, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Jason, on the other hand, was practically glowing with excitement. This wasn't just a marriage to him. It was a victory, a win in the game he had started. His friends were watching, eagerly awaiting his success in fulfilling the bet. He was the center of attention, and everything about the wedding reflected the life he had built for himself. Perfection, wealth, and control. But as he looked at Claire, standing nervously at the altar, he started to notice the distance between them. She wasn't smiling like the brides he'd seen before. She didn't look like she was excited or even happy about the wedding. Instead, she looked serious, as though she was focused on something far more important than the event unfolding around her. As they exchanged vows, Jason noticed how hesitant Claire was, how carefully she spoke her words, almost as if she was signing a contract rather than making a lifelong promise. It was hard for him to ignore the weight of her hesitation, and for the first time, he started to feel the weight of his own decision. Was this really what he wanted? Sure, it was all part of the challenge, but standing there with Claire in front of hundreds of onlookers, he realized just how complicated this whole situation had become. When the ceremony was over, Claire and Jason were whisked away for a series of photographs and interviews, all of which Claire barely registered. She was simply going through the motions, trying to keep her composure for the sake of her children. She had never imagined a life like this, and as Jason led her through the day's events, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was just a pawn in someone else's game. But she also knew that her decision, no matter how strange it seemed, had been made with a clear goal in mind: providing a better future for her kids. That thought alone kept her grounded. Jason, meanwhile, was enjoying the attention. This was his moment, his chance to prove that he could achieve anything. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Claire's quiet demeanor was unsettling, and he was starting to wonder if he had made a mistake, if he had underestimated the situation. As the evening progressed, Claire and Jason were introduced to guests and led through conversations. Jason effortlessly charmed everyone, but Claire remained distant. She wasn't interested in the small talk or the luxury that surrounded them. She had a family to think about, and this event, this whole marriage, seemed like a surreal distraction from the reality of her life on the streets. Her mind was far from the sparkling decor or the endless champagne. It was focused on her twins and how she could make this new life work for them. Despite the glitz and glamour of the night, the cracks in the foundation of this marriage were starting to show. Jason was realizing that Claire wasn't just another woman he could impress with his money. She was different. She wasn't moved by the luxury he offered. And Claire, despite being caught in the whirlwind of the wedding, couldn't shake the sense that she was being treated like a prize rather than a partner. It was a strange, uneasy feeling that hung over the evening, one that neither of them knew how to shake. As the night came to a close, Jason couldn't help but reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. He had expected a simple transaction, but it was becoming clear that their marriage was about to be much more complicated than he had imagined. The days following the wedding were a mix of excitement and confusion for both Jason and Claire. Jason had imagined that life after the ceremony would fall into place easily. He thought he would return to his usual routine while Claire adjusted to the lavish lifestyle he had offered her. But things didn't go as smoothly as he expected. Claire, despite the grand wedding, still felt like a stranger in her new life. Jason's luxurious mansion felt more like a hotel to her than a home. She kept to herself most of the time, trying to make sense of the whirlwind she had just stepped into. She had grown used to surviving on the streets, always alert and ready to protect her children from any danger. Now, surrounded by the security of wealth, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The money, the house, and the fine clothes didn't fill the emptiness inside her. She had never felt so alone in her life. Jason, on the other hand, was beginning to feel frustrated. He had expected Claire to embrace her new life with enthusiasm. After all, she had agreed to marry him for the sake of her children. But instead of gratitude, all he saw was hesitation and distance. Claire hardly left her room, and when she did, she was preoccupied with her twins, who were adjusting to their new surroundings in their own way. Jason wanted to help her, to show her how wonderful this new life could be, but every attempt seemed to fall flat. One afternoon, after another quiet breakfast, Jason decided to sit down and talk to Claire. He wasn't used to uncertainty, especially not when it came to matters he could control. He found her in the living room, playing with the twins, who were laughing as they built a tower with colorful blocks. For a moment, Jason was reminded of how much she truly loved them. It made him pause, realizing that Claire wasn't like the women he was used to. She didn't care about the luxury or the attention. She only cared about her children. "Claire," Jason began, sitting across from her, "I've been noticing that you've been keeping to yourself a lot. I just want to make sure you're okay. You're not alone here. If you need anything, I'm here to help." Claire didn't immediately respond. She continued to build the blocks with her twins, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes steady but distant. "I'm not used to all of this," she said quietly, her voice not filled with anger but with a quiet truth. "I'm used to taking care of my kids, finding ways to survive. This life you're offering, it's too much. It's not what I'm used to. I'm not sure how to be someone I'm not." Jason sat back, surprised by her honesty. He had expected her to appreciate the security he was providing. He had assumed she would embrace the lifestyle and everything that came with it. But Claire's words made him realize how little he truly understood her. She wasn't looking for a fancy house or expensive clothes. She just wanted a chance to rebuild, to feel like she was in control of her own life again. "I'm sorry," he said, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. "I thought you'd be happy here. I thought you'd want to enjoy all the things I can give you." Claire shook her head slowly. "I'm not happy because of things, Jason. I need something real. I need to feel like I'm still in charge of my life. I need to know that my children are safe, and that I'm not just a passenger in this world you've built." Jason listened closely, finally beginning to understand. Claire wasn't just a woman he could fix with money. She was a mother who had fought every day to protect her children, and nothing about that had changed. She didn't want to be part of his world. She wanted to carve out her own path with him, if he was willing to walk alongside her. The conversation left Jason thinking deeply about his own life. For the first time, he questioned whether he had been too focused on appearances, too eager to prove himself in front of others. Maybe he had been trying to fix Claire's life with his wealth, but what she really needed was someone to support her, not try to change her. Jason realized that if their marriage was going to work, it wouldn't be because of money or prestige. It would be because he understood her and saw her for who she truly was, not a charity case, but a woman with her own strength, goals, and dreams. And maybe, just maybe, they could figure out how to make this work, not as a bet, but as a partnership. Claire, for her part, still wasn't sure if this marriage could ever feel real. She appreciated Jason's effort, but deep down, she knew that the road ahead would be far more complicated than either of them had imagined. For now, she was focused on her children and making sure they had everything they needed to thrive in this new life. She could only hope that in time, things would fall into place. As days turned into weeks, things between Jason and Claire slowly began to shift. Jason, determined to make their unusual marriage work, started to change his approach. He could no longer see this as just a bet. It was becoming clear to him that Claire wasn't like anyone he had ever met before. She didn't want his money or his status. She wanted respect, understanding, and above all, a sense of control over her own life. Claire, too, was starting to feel the weight of her decision. She had agreed to marry Jason to give her children a better future, but she hadn't expected to feel so out of place in this new world. At times, the mansion felt suffocating, and the endless luxury surrounding her felt hollow. The money couldn't fill the emptiness that she carried with her, the fears of being judged or pitied for her past. One evening, Claire was sitting by the window, watching the sunset with the twins. They were playing with their toys on the floor, giggling at something funny one of them had said. Jason entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful moment. He had been giving Claire space, respecting her need for time to adjust, but something was pulling him to her now. "Hey," he said softly, sitting down next to her. "How are you holding up?" Claire turned to him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and uncertainty. "I'm trying, Jason. I really am. But it's hard to adjust to all this. It feels like I'm living someone else's life." Jason could see the strain in her eyes, and it made him uncomfortable. He had built his life on controlling everything: his work, his investments, his surroundings. But Claire was different. She wasn't interested in the luxury he provided. She didn't want to be part of a life that felt so distant from her own. "I understand," he said quietly. "This isn't easy. I don't expect you to just fit in. I want to help, but I also want to respect where you're coming from." There was a long pause as Claire processed his words. It was the first time Jason had truly spoken to her without an agenda or expectation. For the first time, he wasn't trying to fix things or prove something to her. It was just a simple conversation, and Claire felt a flicker of hope. "I know you didn't ask for this life," Jason continued, "and I can't pretend to know what it's like for you, but I want to make this work. Not because of the bet, but because we both deserve a chance to make something real out of this." Claire looked at him, her heart conflicted. She had been so focused on the practical aspects of their arrangement, on providing for her children, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what a future with Jason might actually look like. Was it possible for their relationship to go beyond the strange circumstances under which it had begun? "I never wanted to be someone's project," Claire said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not here because I want a handout or a free ride. I'm here because I want my children to have a chance, a real chance to build a life. But I need to feel like I'm making that happen, not just being carried along by someone else." Jason listened carefully, his mind racing. He had assumed that Claire's struggle was all about money, but it was clear that she needed something deeper. It wasn't just about providing for her children. It was about her reclaiming control over her own destiny. And maybe, just maybe, he could help with that. "I promise, I'm not trying to control your life," Jason said earnestly. "But maybe I can help in ways you don't expect. You've been so strong all on your own. Maybe together, we can figure out how to make this work for both of us, for all of us." For the first time in a long while, Claire felt a glimmer of trust. She could see that Jason was trying, really trying, to understand her. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But perhaps there was a way forward, a way to create something between them that was based on more than a bet or an arrangement. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's try. But we do this on our terms, not just yours." Jason smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "On our terms," he agreed. In the weeks that followed, they began to make small changes. Jason took an active interest in Claire's goals and dreams. He learned about her past, about the struggles she had faced to protect her children, and how she had always fought for their future. He began to see her not just as a woman to impress, but as a partner who had her own story, her own strength, and her own aspirations. Claire, in turn, started to open up more. She began to feel more comfortable in the mansion, though it still felt like a strange place to her. But she no longer felt as though she was just a visitor in Jason's world. She began to make decisions about her life and her children's future, with Jason offering support without trying to take over. It wasn't perfect, but they were learning to find their rhythm together. As time passed, things between Jason and Claire began to change in subtle ways. Though their relationship had started under the most unusual circumstances, they were now beginning to truly see one another. Jason found himself more and more drawn to Claire's quiet strength. She didn't need his wealth or attention to feel valued. She had her own dreams, her own desires, and her own way of making things happen, even in the face of hardship. And Claire, for the first time in a long time, began to feel like she wasn't just surviving. She was building something, piece by piece, with Jason by her side. Jason had come to realize that Claire wasn't looking for him to fix everything. She had spent years taking care of herself and her children. She wasn't interested in playing the role of a pampered wife in a grand mansion. She needed more than that. She needed respect, partnership, and the chance to be part of something real. For Jason, this was a revelation. He had always been the one in control, always the one calling the shots. But with Claire, things were different. He couldn't just buy her trust or solve her problems with money. He had to earn it, step by step. Their conversations grew deeper, more honest. They talked about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Jason learned that Claire's decision to marry him hadn't been about the money. It had been about her children. She wanted a better life for them, a life where they wouldn't have to struggle as she had. She wasn't naive. She knew that wealth didn't guarantee happiness, but it gave them a chance. She also revealed that she had dreams of her own, dreams she had put on hold for years. She wanted to start a small business, something that could provide for her children, while giving her the independence she had always longed for. Jason, for his part, began to understand the weight of Claire's choices. He had thought that her life would be simpler, that she would be thrilled to embrace the luxury he offered. But he now realized that Claire didn't want to be defined by his money or success. She wanted to create something of her own, something she could call hers. And that, Jason understood, was something he needed to support, not control. One evening, after they had put the twins to bed, Jason suggested they go for a walk in the garden. It was a cool, quiet night, and the moonlight reflected off the calm surface of the fountain. As they walked, Jason took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "You've been talking a lot about your dreams, and I think it's time we made them happen," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I want to help you start that business," Jason said, his voice sincere. "Not as a charity or a favor, but because I believe in what you want to do. You're right. You don't need me to fix things for you, but I can help you with the resources, with the connections, and with whatever else you need to get started." Claire stopped walking and looked at him, surprised by his words. "You'd do that? You'd really help me start something of my own?" Jason nodded. "I've been thinking about it. You're not just here to be a part of my world, Claire. You're here to make your own world, too. And I want to be a part of that journey, in whatever way I can." Claire was silent for a moment, her thoughts racing. She had always been independent, and the idea of asking for help had never come easily to her. But Jason's words were different. They weren't just empty promises or gestures of charity. They were genuine. He wasn't trying to buy her success. He was offering his support because he believed in her potential. "I don't know what to say," Claire finally replied, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you can imagine." Jason smiled. "You don't have to say anything yet. Let's just figure out how to make it happen together." The next few weeks were filled with planning and discussions. Jason connected Claire with business mentors, people who could guide her as she started to turn her dream into reality. He helped her create a business plan, offering suggestions and advice along the way. But even more important, he made sure Claire was the one in charge. It was her vision, her dream, and Jason was there to support it, not take it over. For Claire, this was a turning point. She had spent so long taking care of everyone else, making sure her children were safe and provided for. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she was building something that was truly hers. She felt empowered, not by Jason's wealth, but by the belief he had in her abilities. It wasn't about the mansion or the cars or the fine clothes. It was about the chance to create a future she could be proud of. As the months passed, Claire's business began to take shape, and with it, so did her confidence. It wasn't easy, but she was determined. Every small victory felt monumental to her, whether it was securing a new client or finding a better way to manage her finances. Jason was by her side, offering advice when she asked for it, but always respecting her decisions. He had learned that supporting Claire didn't mean taking over. It meant standing behind her, trusting in her abilities, and allowing her the space to thrive on her own terms. Their relationship, too, continued to grow. It was no longer just about the strange marriage that had started as a bet. Over time, Jason had come to admire Claire for who she was: strong, independent, and fiercely dedicated to her children. Claire, for her part, had begun to see Jason not as the wealthy businessman she had married out of necessity, but as someone she could rely on and even trust. He wasn't perfect, but he was learning, and he was there when she needed him most. They had started spending more time together, outside of their business meetings and daily routines. They took long walks through the garden, discussing everything from their pasts to their dreams for the future. Jason would sometimes surprise Claire by organizing simple outings to places that didn't involve luxury or money, just quiet moments, away from the spotlight, where they could be themselves. It was in these moments that Claire felt the most at ease, realizing that she had found something more than a partner. She had found someone who truly cared. But even as things between them were improving, Claire still held back in some ways. She had never allowed herself to fully rely on anyone, and the thought of depending on Jason for everything, even emotionally, was something she struggled with. Her past had taught her to stand on her own, to never show weakness, and while Jason had made it clear that he didn't see her as weak, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that asking for help would somehow make her less strong. One evening, after a particularly long day, Claire sat alone in the living room, staring out the window at the moonlit sky. The twins had long since gone to bed, and Jason was working late in his office. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. She had been so focused on her business, on making everything work, that she hadn't taken much time for herself. She felt exhausted, both physically and mentally, and for the first time in a while, she wondered if she was pushing herself too hard. Jason came into the room, his footsteps quiet on the marble floor. He had been watching her from the door, sensing that something was off. He sat down beside her without saying a word, just offering his presence. It was moments like this that made Claire realize how much she had come to rely on him. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was just there, quietly offering support. "Are you okay?" Jason asked gently, his voice low and comforting. Claire sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know. I've been so focused on everything, getting the business off the ground, taking care of the kids, making sure everything's perfect. But sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in it all." Jason didn't say anything at first. He simply reached out, placing a hand on hers. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Claire. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she had to do everything on her own. But in that moment, she realized that it was okay to lean on someone else. It didn't make her weak. It made her human. "You don't have to do everything alone," Jason said softly. "You're not in this by yourself anymore. We're in this together. And if you need help, I'm here. Always." Claire's heart swelled at his words. She had spent so many years feeling like she had to be everything for everyone. But now, for the first time, she realized that it was okay to share the load. It was okay to let someone in. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not used to this. I've always been the one to hold it all together." Jason nodded, understanding. "I know, but that doesn't mean you have to keep doing it all alone. Let me help you. Let me be there for you, just like you've been there for me." It was a turning point for Claire. She had always been the strong one, the one who had to take care of everything. But she was beginning to see that strength didn't come from doing everything alone. True strength came from knowing when to ask for help and allowing others to support you. In the weeks that followed, Jason and Claire continued to grow closer. They shared more of their lives, their fears, their dreams, and slowly, the walls Claire had built around herself began to come down. As the years passed, Jason and Claire's life together began to resemble something neither of them could have imagined when they first started this unusual journey. The business that Claire had worked so hard to build had flourished. It wasn't a massive empire, but it was thriving in its own way, providing for her family and giving her the independence she had always wanted. And with Jason's support, Claire found herself not just financially stable, but emotionally strong as well. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than either of them had expected. What began as a marriage born out of a bet had transformed into a genuine partnership. Jason no longer saw Claire as the woman he had married because of a challenge. He saw her as his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. Claire, for her part, had stopped seeing Jason as the wealthy businessman with all the answers. She saw him as someone who had become her closest friend, her confidant, and someone who cared for her in a way no one ever had before. Their bond grew stronger every day, not just because of the business they had built together, but because of the simple things they shared. They spent time with their children, watching them grow, helping them with their homework, and celebrating every little achievement. Jason, who had once been distant from the idea of family, had become a devoted father figure to the twins. And Claire, who had feared that trusting Jason with her heart would lead to disappointment, found that she had given him a place in her heart that no one else could ever occupy. But their journey wasn't without challenges. Running a business and balancing family life was difficult. There were moments when Claire felt overwhelmed, moments when she doubted whether she could keep everything running smoothly. But Jason was always there, offering support without taking over. He had learned to step back when needed, allowing Claire to take the lead in her own life and in their family. It wasn't always easy, but they had learned to trust one another completely. One evening, after a particularly busy week, Jason and Claire took some time for themselves. They had arranged for a sitter to look after the twins and went out for a quiet dinner, just the two of them. It was a rare moment of peace, a chance to reflect on how far they had come. Over dinner, they shared a quiet conversation, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship, the awkwardness, the misunderstandings, the struggles they had faced. But they also talked about how far they had come, how much they had grown as individuals and as a couple. "Do you ever look back and think about how this all started?" Jason asked, smiling as he took a sip of his drink. Claire laughed softly. "I do, sometimes. I never imagined I'd end up here, with you, with everything we've built. It's strange to think about how much has changed." Jason nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I never expected this either, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad we're here." Claire reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Me too. I never thought I'd be able to trust someone like I trust you. And I never thought I'd be able to build something of my own like this. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's enough." Jason squeezed her hand, his voice sincere. "You've worked so hard for this, Claire. And you've done it on your terms. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us." The words felt like a turning point for Claire. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, afraid to rely on anyone. But in Jason, she had found someone who had proven time and time again that he was there for her, not just because of his wealth or status, but because he truly cared. And for the first time in her life, Claire felt like she was living a life that was truly hers, one that she had built with her own hands, with Jason by her side. As they walked out of the restaurant that night, hand in hand, the world around them felt different. The noise, the expectations, the pressures, they all seemed distant. They didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. They had built something real, something that mattered to them. And that was all that mattered. For the first time since they had met, Claire didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was living. And she was living a life she had chosen for herself, with someone who truly understood her. Their journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but they had learned that together they could face anything. And as they looked ahead, they knew that whatever came their way, they would face it as partners, as equals, and with a love that had grown stronger than either of them could have imagined.